Today, we're going to talk about how to ship AI products fast. And I'm excited because Agostino is joining me for this conversation. He's an ex Shopify ML engineer turned AI entrepreneur and the co founder of Launch Lab, a AI startup studio. So, thank you so much for joining me, Agostino.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Very excited.
I feel like I have so many questions on your whole process because I've been watching you. Well, we've talked a couple of times this past year, but I've
Yeah.
been watching you on LinkedIn, like shipping your products and going through that whole building in public validation process. I'm excited to get into all the nitty gritty details of how you're thinking about it and how you go about building new product ideas. But just to start, like, what would you say is your overall process or framework going from idea to ship product that hopefully people give you money for?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's obviously complex and hard to put it in a short form, but I'd say that we start by tracking problems every day. So every time we ourselves face a problem or we see a problem in a company or whatever, we just write it down, like a few notes, and we have a long list of problems that we just collect, which we revisit regularly and try to score them so that we know which ones are potentially fruitful and which ones are maybe less interesting for us. And then we try to use as much AI in our process as we can. I think that's it's a no-brainer because there's so many good tools out there that we should use them. They are just faster than we are. And that's the whole promise of Launch Lab, that we want to validate quickly just to make sure we drop ideas that are going nowhere. So once we have an idea, we usually use some deep research tool. My favorite right now is Gemini, but everyone can use their tool. Get a first idea of how it could look like, potential product, how the market looks like, are there any big competitors or whatever. Then we are looking into interviews and getting user feedback, either synthetic, because there are nice tools like synthetic users, or the other part could also be that we try to get 5, 6, 7, 10 user interviews in quite quickly, because that's usually the part that takes a lot of time. Run the interviews, and then we build a prototype with one feature only. That's the promise. So we are trying to identify one pain point, want to solve it with one feature, and then we do outreach. It could be email outreach. It depends on the audience you want to reach, right? You have different channels, and usually we set ourselves success metric of, I don't know, signing X amount of paid pilots or this amount of signed up users, to say, hey, okay, after the 6 to 8 weeks, we consider this successful, or we just drop the idea. Maybe we leave the product online, but we move on.
All right. Well, I have a ton of questions just
Yeah,
from that. But
yeah,
basically, you constantly just letting ideas come to you, and then you
right.
have a place to dump them when they just extemporaneously from the ether enter your mind.
Yeah,
And then you have this process of, okay, we've got these ideas, we're going to score them somehow. Then once we got one we like, we're going to do this deep research process to get a sense of the market, what the product could look like. And then the next step is try to talk to 5 to 6 people as quickly as possible and then put something out there like a website or a landing page, mock up,
exactly.
something like that.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of go through one by one. I'm really curious on that scoring process. Like, how do you know an idea is a good one? What are you looking at? Are you thinking about the customer, the potential market? Are you thinking about yourself and your existing experience and expertise and network? Like, what are the dimensions of this scoring, and how do you prioritize which ones are more important than others?
As we launched Launch Lab this year only, we're refining that still. So we started with a framework that is called PAMS. I have to give credits to Nate. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's an entrepreneur currently building Competitor IQ, and he once posted about this framework. I think he even came up with it. And it's a framework that tries to score how painful, how active, how measurable, and how shared a problem is, and gives it a score from 1 to 5 for each of the 4 dimensions. In the end, you have an overall score, and that basically tells you which idea to go for. The problem with that, which we identified recently, is you need to understand the market or the pain point or the customers to be able to say, okay, it's that painful, or it's a 5 active, or it's really measurable or not. So if you know a potential audience, that's easier. If you are in a market that you don't know, it's super hard to score. So we might use Gemini already to score or to get an early idea. Often we run into problems on our own. And I mean, I've worked in a few companies. I'm currently freelancing, so I've worked with even more companies now. Neil, my co-founder, same story. So we've seen a few problems, and sometimes we just have a chat with our friends or other colleagues, and if you hear about the same problem 2 or 3 times, we just get a certain sense, which is then not that quantitative anymore, but you just have to rely on your experience and your taste a little bit. And then obviously the following steps should validate your idea quite quickly. And if you don't find anything after the interviews, you've maybe wasted 2-3 weeks instead of way more, and you can go back.
Sounds like it's not a linear process. So
No,
you
yeah,
you have this POMS approach, which
yeah.
gives you a little bit of a grounding, but doing the scoring across each of these dimensions, pain, accuracy, market, and measurable, and then size.
No, it was
Oh, shared,
pain active.
active,
Like do you
active.
have a
Yeah,
daily or monthly that problem?
yeah.
Then measurable and then shared. Yeah,
Shared. Okay.
yeah,
So, but these can be hard to score if you don't have a good context of the customer and the
correct.
pain. But then there's this other dimension that you're just working with clients, you're talking to colleagues, you're just talking to friends, and maybe ideas come from there. Let's just say you pick one from like
Yeah,
vibes
yeah,
or have whatever affinity toward an
yeah.
idea. That deep research part is super interesting. What are the kinds of things you're asking Gemini to extract for you? Do you have like, I'm sure you got some kind of prompt template for this. Like, what
Yeah.
are some of the key elements there?
Yeah, so we had a few iterations on the prompt. Basically, it's a simple prompt that we passed to OpenAI's Deep Research, Gemini, and Perplexity. I personally think Gemini had the best output, which is why we went with it. But I really believe that OpenAI's Deep Research was as well really good. Perplexity in some ways was a bit too high level for us, so we dropped it. But I'm not saying that one is definitely better than the other. And what we're looking into is basically trying to verify the pain that we defined by research. So there are obviously BCG, McKinsey, and other research companies. They usually have some studies, they have run some interviews, some surveys, whatever. So by verifying the pain or narrowing it down a little bit, or even capturing nuances. Sometimes I formulate some like a pain really broadly, and then through these deep research approaches, or like through the surveys you get, you see a few nuances. So that is definitely one part. Then the market, very basic. I think usually, and that's maybe a critique point about deep research tools, they are overly optimistic. So whatever question you ask them, it's always a big market. So again, you have to dig a bit deeper, but at least you have 5, 10, 15 sources already that Gemini showed you in that case. And then sometimes we also let it come up with a potential ICP, so an ideal customer profile. Recently, I started asking it for potential MVP ideas or feature ideas as well that connect to all of the above. Sometimes it adds a few other components like regulatory components on its own, which is super helpful when you're working in regulatory industries. But yeah, I think these are the key components.
So it sounds like it gives you a great like starting place and primer into
Yeah.
an idea, an industry, a specific customer. Do you go back to the earlier validation step and retry that POMS approach or try to rescore, reprioritize ideas after this deep research step?
Yeah, I also try to use Gemini for scoring
Okay.
in this framework. I felt it was a bit too optimistic. Like everything was really high important and very urgent, and a very big opportunity with a very big market. So I moved away from it. I think maybe with more information or multiple iterations might be possible. I think it's also common knowledge around like about LLMs that they are kind of yes sayers a little bit, and I felt that there a little bit. So we try to avoid to go back, but obviously like it's not a hard no.
And then I'm curious, like, how do you start getting those initial interviews, like those 5 to 6?
Mhm.
Is it just reaching out to people in your network that might be the ideal customer, or just randomly reaching out and saying, "Hey, do you know anyone that fits this description?"
So I think the first like approach now was using synthetic users, which was interesting. The first time I used it was kind of cool, maybe a bit too high level for what I was looking for. So there it comes back to there's not a real shortcut in the end, right? Like we thought maybe it's the perfect shortcut and you don't need these interviews early on, but it's a nice tool. It gives additional insights. And then it's just outreach to my network. Luckily, I try to connect with many people every week. I try to have chats when people ask me about like interviews or help, I try to say yes as many times as possible, just in case I might need something. It's more likely that they would say yes to an interview. But that's also like that approach is to a certain degree scalable because I cannot reach out to the same people 3-4 times a year, just asking them all the time in case we want to validate more and more products. So right now still works. It's what works for us. And yeah, mainly LinkedIn outreach for me because that's where most of my network lives.
Another interesting approach to getting those early customer interviews I've heard is you typically make the landing page after you've after you've
Hmm.
done these interviews, but a lot
Yeah.
of people will say do it before. You just do really simple mock-up of the idea, just
Yeah.
call out the avatar, describe the pain, describe the solution, and then just have a wait list sign up.
Hmm.
And the goal of the wait list isn't to convert, but to talk to those people. And so if
Yeah.
you get like 50 people to sign up for a wait list, it's probably you can get 5 of them to talk to you and they'd be happy to talk about their pains because people love talking about their problems. Is that something you've considered or something that you guys have explored?
We haven't considered it yet. It's a great point. I'll definitely talk with my co-founder about it.
Yeah, well, now going to that next step. So
Yeah.
now you've had these interviews. Is this just like have you ever kind of gotten to this interview point and just said, okay, let's just scrap this idea and go back to the beginning? Or is it, no, let's just like keep pushing through until we get to this final step of like making the landing page? Because that's like another thing I'm curious about. Like for me, I try to come up with these frameworks all the time. Like, okay, this is
Hmm.
how I'm going to validate a new idea. This is
Yeah.
how I'm going to launch a new product, but it's so easy to get into checklist mode. It's like, okay, let me check this off. Let me check this off. Like if I'm just going through this checklist, I might just want to complete it instead of turning back and starting over if I'm not seeing the right signals. Like, what does that typically look like for you guys?
Yeah, as well. I think for us, it's more the more interviews you have, I think ultimately you will find a pain point, and then the question is only: is it what you expected in the beginning, or does it confirm your hypothesis, or have you discovered a different pain point that is still worth solving? Because you're still talking to your same ICP, you're still talking to the same people that you want to target, and if your idea maybe didn't match their pain point 100%, but 3 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 flagged something differently that is shared across different companies, then I think that's super valuable. Like once we, for example, validated an idea for a sales coach, it's a very crowded market, so there are a few competitors, etc., etc. And like during these interviews, we figured out that onboarding for sales folks was a big pain, and that came up in literally every interview we had. So it was then kind of the natural step. Instead of saying no, we want to continue our idea, we were like, oh, this is so obvious. Like the technology we were thinking about in our tech stack was adaptable, so it was an easy switch. And then yeah, we basically were still in the same area or like in the same industry, same field, but with a slightly different angle to it.
Okay, interesting. So
Yeah.
you basically lock down the industry and the avatar and a general sense of pain, but pains can have many sub pains to them, and you can
Yeah,
go
right.
really deep into it. So you're staying in that same area, but your picture, your mental model of that area gets more and more refined the more people that you're talking to. And then
Exactly.
making that transition to actually building something. So how do you do that? Like how do you take the qualitative data you're gathering in these interviews and all the things leading up to it, and then how do you decide what to build and like what does that process look like?
Yeah, so ideally in the interviews, you spend 1 or 2 questions on something like how would your ideal solution look like. That doesn't mean you will build exactly what your customer told you they would expect, but you get an idea of what an output or a result could look like that would satisfy them. And then it's basically just building an initial feature, right? Like something that we think meets these requirements or meets this pain. We've built our internal framework and we made it public as well. So it's called LaunchMate, with which we try to have all the boilerplate code set up already so that we can focus on this one feature that we want to build. And once we've built that with a decent looking UI, like nothing fancy, we usually would go back to the like people we interviewed or just push it out on LinkedIn and start the outreach process. And then you'll quickly get feedback, right? Like someone will tell you, hey, actually, we don't need more dashboards. We need something that pops up in Slack, or we need this or that, and then it's iterative. And then we try to get these iterations in really quickly, just to make sure we don't spend weeks and weeks on it.
Okay, so you go from the interviews right to building something, to
Yeah,
writing some
yeah.
code. Why not the mock-up approach or just a landing page describing your ideas? Because that feels like a very intentional decision to we're actually going to build out something that works and does something.
Yeah, I think this approach of don't write any code until you sold your product already comes a bit from a time where we haven't had LLMs and Cursor. And for me, for example, setting up a nice website or a slide deck or a click dummy in Figma almost takes longer than building a click dummy in Cursor. So I'm like, with this framework we built for ourselves, plus Cursor, plus me being more technical than a front end master, if we know what feature we want to build, we're up and running in a day, basically. So I think this idea of don't build and first have a mock-up or a website comes more from a time where building code was really costly and time consuming. And I'm more of the opinion that no matter what you want to do, if you can do it fast, prioritize this way of doing it. So for me, it's writing code. I'm way faster than building a Figma prototype that usually looks also worse. I think that way also, like, you obviously you can demo your code, but you could theoretically also run ads and people sign up on their own and can test it out. So for me, that makes way more sense now than the traditional approach.
Yeah, so before it just took so much longer to build an MVP. Like maybe
Yeah,
before, maybe it would take like a month or more,
yeah,
weeks, a couple weeks if you were really good. But now you could, take a day or maybe even a few hours to spin something up. Especially if you have like your internal boilerplate code with Launchmate. It just seems like you can build something very quickly with that. I'm curious more to talk more about your tech stack and what you use to code, what languages you're using, what frameworks you're using, what libraries you find most helpful. I don't know, just kind of like what does your tech stack look like and what's the process of going from 0 to 1?
So the primary language I code in is Python. It's basically what probably most ML engineers and data scientists do. So it's Python. Then I use React for the front end, combined with Tailwind and some UI component libraries like Radix or Daisy UI. There are dozens. I try to take as much front end like code from where I can, because I'm not like, my strong suit is not designing front ends. If I would do it from scratch, it would look very average. So they're like great templates for front ends in React, combining with these UI component libraries that you can use. So we do that. Database is Superbase because I think it's easy to set up. It's free. We try to use as many free tools as possible, which gets you really far. We deploy on Vercel at the moment. Analytics, we're using Plausible, but Vercel also recently improved their analytics tracking. So I might look into that, like still using Plausible, but we might switch in a bit. Stripe for payments. And then we use Brevo as our email sending service, which has a great Python integration or Python API. So that's basically our tech stack. Then I use Cursor as IDE with my own Cursor rules, which I can recommend setting up. It's basically like, it made my development experience so much faster. I use in Cursor, like, to go really deep down. Obviously, the agent mode combined with Gemini 2.5 at the moment, because I feel that gives me the best outputs. Yeah, I think that's my
Yeah.
tech stack.
Well, I feel like that is super insightful. There were
Yeah,
some that I used, which makes me kind of it helps me because now I can just like copy you, like
yeah,
try out some of these
perfect.
other things that you're doing.
Yeah,
But like the emailing service, that's not one I had considered before, but I can see that where that would be like super handy. You're trying to like send out blasts to
yeah.
customers and things like that. And you also mentioned the analytics. So, what metrics are you looking for, and how does that inform your idea of let's keep going with this product or let's scrap it and move on to
Yeah,
something else?
it's a good question, and I think prime example for that was LaunchMate, which was a product we launched recently. So the metrics we are tracking are basic web metrics. Like we are not trying to overcomplicate it because that just makes it more complicated. I would never recommend to have 10, 15 different metrics because then you need to prioritize them, et cetera, et cetera. So we use things like scroll depth, button clicks, successful and failed sign up processes, and that are basically the main metrics we're looking at, because we want to understand when someone comes to us or like sees our website, do they even scroll? Where do they interact with us, and where do they bounce? And with LaunchMate, we saw we had a lot of traffic on the website, but people left the website without interacting with it. So we, like after a week, we restructured the website to increase interactions with the website. And that's an experiment in the end, right? So I think that's a typical experiment you have with landing pages to figure out, hey, how do I show the value quickly so that someone either buys directly or at least spends some time on the website. So we had a few iterations there. And then our final metric is basically just paid users. So we are not offering anything for free yet, because we think that paying for something is the best validation you can get. We also we are more looking to bootstrapping right now. I think that's what we're currently looking for. And I think buying is the strongest signal you can get, versus when someone signs up for free, that could give you more could bring up your hopes too much, and then you fail later on. So yeah, that's what we're tracking.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So at this point, you've launched a MVP. It's a product that works. There's a buy now button with Stripe
Correct.
integration, so people can give you money. It's not just emails. And the ultimate thing you're looking at is number of paid users, and you're not doing free tiers because you're looking for that validation signal, and you're bootstrapping. And I feel like that's something a lot of VC funded startups do. They have free tiers because they're just trying to grow very quickly. And then they're going to figure out how to monetize the user base later on. And then they have that luxury because they have runway. But when you're bootstrapping something, you don't have that luxury of, having free tiers and things like that. Was there any process to picking your tech stack? Or was it, this is stuff I already know, let me just go click around Google, let me see what other people are using, and then Supabase looks easy, let me add that. So what was that process like for you? Because I feel people get overwhelmed by the number of tools and frameworks out there.
Yeah, and in the end, I also mentioned a couple of tools right now. Not all of them are necessary. Just to flag that, I just figured out that this is the tech stack I work well with. What I did is, obviously, I knew Python was the language I'm most familiar with, so I stuck with it. The entire tech stack, you could also remove Python and just use TypeScript or JavaScript, and it would still work. But then I would need to totally pivot to a programming language I don't know well, so I tried to avoid that. I just had the feeling that I was using Python as front end language as well, and then someone, I cannot remember who was, recommended using React, and then the combination of React and Tailwind was so smooth that it was just natural for me to use that, because the experience from day one was so good, and my front ends looked so much better that I knew, okay, let me learn it a little bit. Still, Cursor is doing the heaviest lift here. So that's it. And then I just looked at similar products like LaunchMate and their tech stack, and Supabase was there. Brevo was something I just found on my own. I wanted to use a different service, but their sign up process was so annoying that I just dropped it. So Brevo was by accident. Plausible is a European company, which I try to support from now and then because I'm based in Europe. So sometimes supporting a European company is also kind of nice. What else? Stripe, self-explaining, easiest integration. So it was a mix between what I knew, what someone recommended to me, a little bit of research, and then it just fell into place.
Yeah, I like that. This one's a bit more of a technical question, but I'm so, like most data scientists and ML folks, I'm comfortable with Python, but never touched React or any of the web development tools and frameworks out there. How do you glue those two things together? Like, how do you glue Python and React together from a technical standpoint?
Yeah, so you basically have a front end and a back end server spinned up, and then you, with your front end, you just ping your fast API back end, very simple, and then yeah, then you send data back and forth.
And then you're using Vercel for the hosting. So you have the front end implemented in React sitting in Vercel, you have the back end implemented in Python sitting in Vercel, and then you have these endpoints, and that's how they talk to each other.
Correct, exactly. And Vercel is, I was like, before I used AWS, I used the Google Cloud, I used Microsoft, and they're all great for different purposes. But for these early MVPs, for this proof of concept, Vercel is incredibly nice. Like it's super fast. They have a CLI that is straightforward. You can deploy as a preview, which is kind of your test environment, and also your production environment. So you have these two environments, which in the free tier as well, you can deploy multiple projects in your free tier. They have the analytics part integrated. Their UI, their web UI is very, very simple to understand. It looks really, really nice. And the setup in your code is also very easy. You need one file, one JSON file, and you're good to go.
Okay, so it sounds like speed is the number one priority
Yeah.
in your whole approach to building these products. From the idea portion to what we've talked about so far of like shipping that initial MVP, what's that typical time window for you guys?
So we want to get to 6 weeks. I think 8 weeks is realistic right now because we're still trying to find a good process. I would rather spend 8 weeks now on an idea instead of dropping an idea too early, right? Because that's the balance. We should not, I don't know, sacrifice quality or maybe a week or like a day more to and drop a good idea that might have had potential. So we said 8 weeks now, and then we want to cut it. But ideally, we get to down to 6 weeks at some point when we are a bit like when we know the tools and processes even a bit better.
And then what's taking you the most time? Is it the coming up with the idea, talking to the customers, or the building?
Yeah, I think interviewing customers, like the first round of interviews, and then outreach, like getting people to buy and use the tool. So we are also trying to like, if you look at the 8 weeks, probably the first like quarter is dedicated to like everything until shipping a prototype, and then the rest. I think distribution is at the moment something that is, yeah, basically the bottleneck. I don't think nowadays building stuff is the bottleneck anymore. I think now it comes to distribution. So if you nail distribution, you have more iterations, you get more feedback, and then you can adopt faster. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that process. Like, how do you let people know? So you built this MVP. How do you let people know about it? Do you have a framework for that, or does it seem to be different every single time?
That's different from time to time because it depends on what you're building and who you want to talk to, right? Nate, who I talked about earlier, who developed the Palms framework, he's also building in public and talking about cold email outreach a lot because that's the hardest to crack. And if you validate it through cold email outreach, you can probably sell even more. Then, yeah, if you like, it also depends. Do you build B2B, B2C? I think Reddit, X, and LinkedIn are great social media platforms where you can also like search for pain points, then see who commented on it or liked it, and then reach out to those folks. Yeah, communities as well. So it really depends on what you build.
Yeah.
And I'm also not the expert on outreach. It's Neil, my co-founder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, maybe we can talk about or
yeah,
Launchmate specifically.
yeah.
How did you guys go about doing the distribution for that one?
Yeah, so we were basically across social media posts. We were looking for people with the same pain points, and then reached out to these people. We we basically looked at LinkedIn and Reddit mostly. The problem with Reddit and also Discord is that you can obviously not promote your products in many channels and servers, which is good to maintain a certain quality of a community. But we gave our best and otherwise LinkedIn outreach posts. I think if once you are a bit more serious about your idea and your product, you can also reach out to other creators who share it. So yeah, so basically finding a post about the pain points and seeing who commented, because commenting is a better signal than likes in our view.
Is this at the early stage where you're still trying to talk to customers, or is this after you ship the MVP, or both?
That's after we shipped the MVP. So basically,
Okay.
like this outreach that I described is when we've our one feature product.
Okay, got it. So for Launchmate, how many times did you post on LinkedIn about it? And then you did a Reddit post as well, like about that? What's the volume? What are in these posts? Like kind of going a little bit into the details if you
Yeah.
could.
So I posted a couple of times about, like, I don't know, a handful of times about Launchmate. There were probably 2 posts just about launch, about hey, this is it, etc. Then I had 2 or 3 more posts about what I used Launchmate for. For example, we were redoing our website and our landing page for Launchmate, and we were thinking about, hey, how could we improve our copywriting? And then I quickly spun up a tool that gave us a score and some analysis about certain copywriting principles. And then once I had that tool, I just gave it a nice front end and made it look nice and made a post about that. So I had 2, 3 posts like that. And then we probably reached out to a couple of hundred people, yeah, just that we found in comments, posts, etc. Reddit was a bit tough in that sense because many posts got removed again. So yeah, I wouldn't count Reddit as great source. It was mainly LinkedIn in that case. Yeah.
And then you mentioned you have your co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
So you're more the technical hat, he's
Yeah.
more the marketing hat. During this whole process, what are the different focuses, responsibilities? How are you guys distributing work? Because it feels like you guys could kind of do a lot of this 50-50. Because even though you're technical, like you have a pretty big LinkedIn following, you've been
Yeah.
making content for a while. So I'm just curious how you guys do the division of work.
Yeah, I think the first 2 phases of deciding on an idea, doing a little bit of research and user interviews, we do it both of us because I also believe that it is super important that if you're just 2 people, both know what customers want, what they are talking about. Sometimes when we're in an interview together, I understand A, he understood B, and then we suddenly notice that we understood totally different things from one and the same statement. Then obviously building the prototype is all on me. I lead it, but Neil then on the other side, he tests it, he gives feedback on the copy, on the layout of the website. So like he does that a lot. So that's basically his input, whereas like the really deep tech stuff is more on my end. And when it comes to outreach, I support Neil. Then it's the other way around. So he leads the experiments, he plans the experiments, he thinks about like where could the potential audience like be found, etc., etc. And then he tells me really direct, hey, I need this from you, I need this from you in that format, which is great because that way I learn how outreach is done, but at the same time I support him with this process.
Okay, nice. So it feels like a really nice synergy because at the beginning, you guys work together on validating, talking to customers. When it comes to building, you're taking the lead. When it comes to distribution, he's taking the
Yeah.
lead, and it kind of plays upon both your strengths. The last question, and before we kind of open it up to Q&A, because there are a few questions from the Discord I want to throw in.
Yeah.
And if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to start dropping it in the comments. But I feel like a fundamental question in entrepreneurship is push versus pivot. So you've kind of gone through this whole process. You've talked to customers, you've built stuff, you've shared it with people. How do you know, or how do you decide we should keep going with this thing, or okay, let's scrap it and start the whole process over again?
Yeah, so right now it's a conversion rate that we're aiming for. So we're saying, hey, if we reach it, also like Launchmate is a bit more a B2C product for individuals. So like we use different numbers, but if we are looking into B2B products, we're saying, I don't know, we reach out to 500 companies or 600 companies in way A or B. And in the end, we want to have 3 paid pilots or whatever. And we said that in the beginning and then validate it based on that. It's obviously it always depends a little bit. Now, what like let's say you want to have five paid pilots and you only get 4. What do you do with it? It's like so close, but still not. I think these are edge cases we need to see how our outreach was, how narrow our ICP was, because it could also be that like maybe all 4 companies that signed up were exactly the same type of company, but like our pool to which we reached out to was a bit too mixed. So I think we're not like we're trying to have it really analytically and with like strong boundaries and thresholds, but in the end it's always a little bit of judgment involved. So we're trying to be really strict and drop ideas because we don't want to fall in love with an idea that maybe in an overcrowded market or has no future.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like a science experiment where you set your hypothesis at the
Yeah,
beginning,
yeah,
so you're not swayed by the data that you're seeing to kind
yeah.
of trick yourself into having a good idea. I'll sneak in one other question because we've been focusing on LaunchMate. What are some of the other things you guys have been building the past few months?
Yeah, so we haven't launched anything in the end, but what we looked into was a sales coach, for example. We thought a sales coach would be a good idea. Turns out an incredible amount of companies do that already with big companies like Gong. I still think the quality is not there yet, but still like big company, like we decided against it. Then we also looked into the B2B software buying process. So companies, when they buy software, it's a long process, it's cumbersome. Often they have a vendor lock in, then they're stuck with a tool for 12 months, figure out 2 months in, oh, that's actually not what we needed. So we just got sold something. So we looked into that as well. Then came Launchmate, and now we are looking into our next idea, which is too early to share, but we'll probably have something in a few weeks up.
Okay, cool. Oh, so LaunchMate was the third idea. It wasn't the first idea. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
so Launchmate was the first idea under Launch Lab. So we branded it finally under Launch Lab. And Neil and I, we've been working together for a while already. So basically last year, and have validated a few ideas until we came to a point where we realized, okay, these are our strengths. We like doing it, even though the first two ideas maybe for various reasons didn't work. Let's try to continue validating ideas now in a more
Yeah.
structured approach. And out of that, Launchmate was born.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, let's start pivoting to Q&A, and then we can
Perfect.
come back to my questions at the end if we have time. So, first one's on security. So, how do you think about the security about your AI product? Is this something that you guys are even concerned about at the beginning? Because I feel like security can sometimes feel like a rich person, like a rich people problems where, maybe you're getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of visits, and then it could be concerning. But I don't know. How do you guys think about it at this early stage?
Yeah, so security is obviously super important, especially in B2B. I think most of our network is located in Europe, so they are very concerned about data security, etc. I have a German background, so when you talk to German companies, that's number one priority. So when we build these products, it's definitely a concern, but that's why we want to have paid pilots, for example, or like build it with companies to know what security layers we need to build so that they are happy with it. Usually we have built products in the past which were then basically hosted in Azure using maybe an OpenAI instance that is based in Europe. So like you give a lot of that security part also to the big, like to the cloud providers, etc., so that you have to handle a certain part, but I think we are confident with that one. So yeah, and in the early days, if it's a paid pilot, we're trying to be as secure as possible, but in the end, we can only do as much.
So it sounds like it's more on the B2B side of things, but like with LaunchMate, were there any conversations around security? Were there any major concerns you had to
There
think
were
about?
no concerns. No one flagged anything. We were really transparent with what it does and what it doesn't.
Right.
So in the end, we offer like the output for LaunchMate right now is still a GitHub repository. So everyone gets access, and when they deploy, there's a certain responsibility on the owner as well, obviously, and we communicate as clearly as possible what we do and what we don't.
So maybe like a tangential question because, well, I guess LaunchMate is just like a boilerplate thing, but I imagine that sales coach
Mm-hmm.
idea or some of these
Yeah,
products that integrate large language models, these APIs,
yeah.
do you guys have, I don't know, how do you guys think about using APIs and privacy there or just managing API costs and things like that?
Yeah. So in the end, we had like I think the first thing you should do is have some kind of a login logic so that not everyone can just call your tool all the time, because there are some bots that would just call your tool, and then LLM call or API costs could increase significantly. And for the sales coach, we deployed it on Azure, used a open like an LLM that was hosted in Europe, because the companies we work with were European companies, so we had to follow GDPR, basically. And when like the instances are like the LLM instances and the data warehouse, when everything is hosted in Europe, that is basically sufficient already, because data is treated according to GDPR automatically, and that made it easy.
Where's this all going? Like, what is the ideal outcome here? Or is it, more we'll just kind of keep doing it and see what happens? What's kind of like the vision of
Yeah.
Launch Lab?
We have not formulated a vision yet. We talked literally last week or 10 days ago. We talked about it. It's on my bucket list as well. So good point. To be fair, I think it's important to have a vision and knowing why we're doing what we're doing. But like formulating a vision and a mission also requires work and effort to make it properly. And we just deprioritized it for the last 10 days, to be fair. We should do it soon. But I think before making Launch Lab official, Neil and I, we had a future, like we're friends as well. So like we know each other for a long time, and we had a few really honest chats about how we imagine our balance between work and life, what type of work we want to do. And out of that, like that's why we decided to try bootstrapping in the beginning and not raising money, because we think that this would fit more the lifestyle we want to live, the stuff we want to do. Then we talked about what happens when maybe a product gets traction. We're both open to scale it, maybe to find other systems. So I think we're aligned because we're friends for a really long time. We want to do the same stuff with a similar lifestyle. So that's kind of aligned. But Launch Lab itself, we still need to formulate a good vision and mission. So it's more between us, but not for the company yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just making sure that you and Neil have that alignment and where you want to go, your values and things like that. Are you guys both
Exactly.
in Barcelona or are you guys doing it
No,
remotely?
he's based in Amsterdam.
Oh,
But
Amsterdam. Oh, okay.
he likes Barcelona, so he's here from now and then. And I have a few reasons to go to Amsterdam.
Nice. So
Yeah.
how long have you guys known each other before going into business together?
2018 probably. Like we met 2018 in Berlin, and then he's a very entrepreneurial person, so he basically validates business ideas since I know him. So it's great, and I learned a lot about that entire process, for example. And then last year I left Shopify and started freelancing, also with the idea to potentially build my own company. And then luckily Neil at the same time was available and had no other person to validate ideas with. And then it was good timing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
the other thing I want to ask about is like more tactical because I feel like
Mhm.
a lot of people they want to ship products or they want to be AI entrepreneurs. They want to
Yeah.
because there's clearly a big transformation happening with this technology, and people want to be part of it. They want to usher in that transformation. They want to
Yeah.
build the next generation of businesses, but there's a reality in that most businesses will fail, especially some using a new technology like large language models and all the models that we're seeing these days. So how can you like basically pay the bills, keep the lights on while you're doing these like high risk ventures? And then what would you recommend to other ML engineers or data scientists who want to do something similar?
That's a very good question. And I think it very much depends on the risk appetite you have. Mine, for example, is can I love doing what I do with Launch Lab because I know I can pay the bills with my freelance jobs. That means I work my freelance hours and I have basically my freelance clients and additionally do work for Launch Lab. So overall, that results in maybe a few hours more compared to when you just leave your job and then validate your business idea for 3 months and then you have to decide if you can do it or not. I personally didn't have and don't have this risk appetite when I'm not looking for VC money, right? So if I would say, okay, I want to raise money and I know like I don't need a working product, but I need kind of an idea that's somehow validated and then I can raise money and continue, then that would be one thing. But as we want to bootstrap it, some kind of cash flow is relevant for us and for the risk appetite we have. But there are various ways to do it. I think it really depends on what you do and how you want to do it. And in the end, I think one thing that I realized, and I cannot remember who told me that, is that you don't always have to win an entire market, right? Sometimes you talk with people about an idea that just came to your mind, and someone else is like, yeah, but someone else is doing this, or it already exists here, or this is a similar version. But in the end, if you know how much maybe yearly salary you want to pay yourself out, or how much you need to survive, then you can figure out, okay, if I have a product that makes 100,000 euros a year or whatever you wanna make, then you don't need to conquer an entire market. You just need a snippet. You need to maintain that snippet and see how far you come with it.
That's something I believed, and I feel like a lot of early entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs believe. They're like, oh, someone already took that idea, so I can't do it. But then it's kind of a ridiculous statement, because like you shouldn't open a hamburger joint because McDonald's exists or something like that. There are markets all the time where just because there's a huge player or they're like established businesses doesn't mean you can't have a successful business in that sector. There are new hamburger shops opening up all the time. Well, maybe the analogy doesn't transition over to
No,
Europe,
I get it.
but in the US,
Yeah,
we got a lot of hamburger
same.
spots.
Yeah, here as well. Yeah, one example we had, for example, is the sales coach, right? We talked to, I don't know, 20, 30 people in sales, and everyone told us, oh yeah, there is something like that out there, like Gong or 20 other tools. Other people I talked to were like, oh yeah, I know a tool like that. Turns out no one of the sales team uses it, but is still complaining that their feedback process is broken somehow, and that like them getting feedback on their calls is like not as they want it to be. Same for managers who spend a lot of time on feedback, and there's still this disconnect. So somehow there are dozens of tools that, yeah, at least for the people we interviewed, were not satisfying. So yeah, I think the interviews then gave us a bit of confidence in, even though there are players in the market, the problem is not fully solved yet.
Yeah, it's just kind of getting that extra context, extra data from the user interviews. Okay, so this will be the last question. You've been on this path for a while now because you were working full time at Shopify. You left in August 2024, is that right?
Correct.
So I guess if you could go back and give Agostino of August 2024 some advice, what's like one key piece of advice or wisdom you would give him based on everything you've learned these past several months?
Trust yourself a little bit more. I think when you listen to people, when you connect to many people, when you're continuously learning, and I know that there's this thing of saying 1% every day better, and this brings you that far. But I think if Agostino in August would have trusted himself a bit more, I would have stressed myself less for the first few weeks, because then making the shift from being employed to freelancer to potentially validating your own ideas, I was stressed out a little bit, because especially in Europe in July, August, maybe a bit of September, everyone's on vacation. So I got very little feedback and was thinking, oh, maybe I wasn't ready for something like that. 6-7 months later, turns out I was. So yeah, just a little bit of trust in yourself and listening to the people you talk to, and then it will be fine.
Well, I feel like that's a great place to end it. Agostino, thanks so much for coming on and talking about your experience. Thank you, everyone who joined live. We'll have a podcast next month where I'll be talking to Hamel Hussein about AI evals. So if you're interested in building robust AI applications, that's going to be a great one. Thanks again, Agostino, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.
Thanks for having me. Ciao, ciao.